So a lot of you know that I like to read nonfiction rather than fiction, and a lot of you follow me because I pick less popular nonfiction books rather than all the popular nonfiction books. But I also read fiction, and some of you actually asked me to share some of the fiction that I read, and I will say that for the last couple of years I have not been reading fiction. It's been very sparse. Now, however, I'm beginning to read fiction more routinely, at least like one fiction book a month. So in the spirit of my reading new fiction books, I decided to explain what a nonfiction reader like myself views fiction books useful for. In general, I tend to view the fiction and nonfiction dichotomy not one based on truth, like one is based on empirical facts about reality, which would be nonfiction, and one is based on completely, totally made up stuff, like imagination. You could say maybe rationality. I don't view it like that anymore. I used to view it like that, and I know a lot of people do view it like that, but now the way I kind of view it is nonfiction tends to describe the models of reality, whereas fiction, at least the kind of fiction that I like to read, is the application of those models to a reality that we can't really obtain through human ability. Now, how do I explain this? As a starter, let's consider psychological fiction. Psychological fiction is a genre where the narrative or the plot of the book is carried on by the internal characterizations of one of the people or the characters inside the book. Rather than seeing a series of events unfold from a third-person perspective, we get to see the series of events unfold through the first-person perspectives of different characters. As an example, take Young Werther. The Sorrows of Young Werther. In that book, the plot gets carried by Werther's point of view, and Werther has a lot of choices he makes and a lot of behaviors he engages in that are explained by describing the psychology of Werther. He has an intense romantic affection for a particular person, and that guides and informs his actions and choices. This kind of writing can help you inform the models you have about psychology better, which is why I would read psychological fiction. It helps me understand people better. It gives me more fuel for the models that I have. It's kind of like if the model is a car, you get a new model, you get a new car, then you need fuel, and the fuel can be the fiction. And I think with academic psychology, there's actually a really big problem where you get a lot of theoretical stuff, but not many case studies or examples. And usually when I pick up, like, say, like a personality psychology book or something like this, I do look for case studies. And 9 times out of 10, the case studies will either be too jargony or too technical and not really truly a case study, or it'll be written by a psychotherapist, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but psychotherapists have a particular way of writing. So with fiction, you kind of get to explore some of the realms that ethics wouldn't allow you to go to in like a psychotherapeutic setting. But in addition to that, it lets you explore some of the more unique combinations where you might not find any relevant case studies to actually see. For example, when you read, say, psychological crime, I like to read crime fiction where some of the stuff that they talk about, like the minds of killers or how certain situations can pressure people into killing, you can't really explore that in a case study, perhaps because of ethical limitations, but also people like this are going to be rare in the population. Another great example is historical fiction. Historical fiction it's like if you read a nonfiction history book, you'll get a timeline, you'll get an outline of what happened, a series of events, but the painting won't be painted, right? It'll just be the sketch. And reading historical fiction kind of paints the picture for you. A terrific example of this is Dostoevsky's Demons. Dostoevsky's Demons is a book that tries to make commentary and characterizes the real-world playing out of ideological conflicts, revolutionary movements, and things of such nature. It kind of covers revolutionary Russia as it was, like feet on the ground, so to speak. Another book like this is The Three-Body Problem. I actually recently started reading that, and I was shocked to see the vivid characterizations of early China. The way that it was very, very industry-oriented. He gives descriptions of forests just being torn down en masse. Kind of the 1984-esque revision of language going on. It's very interesting stuff that allows you to understand the historical timeline with a more vivid picture, like a painted picture, not just a sketch. Science fiction is also another one of these types of fictions that I really like to read. It can get a bit carried away. Some science fiction does get carried away. But what is great about science fiction is it can take some of the current understandings that we have in science and apply them to maybe a theoretical limit that we could never reach as humans. A terrific example of this is Dune, actually, which I haven't read yet, but I understand the premise of the book, the series of books, and I want to read them. The idea behind Dune is, or some of the ideas in Dune, I should say, is based off of the geopolitics, let's say from 1920, arguably up to current times. And if, for example, in the Middle East, there is a nomadic group of people that have a resource that can be used to fuel arguably imperial powers, okay? Well, in Dune, there is a planet that nomadic people inhabit, and they have been living with a natural resource that an imperial power wants to use to fuel power projection for their empire. That goes on in Dune. So it takes the current understanding of geopolitics now and applies it to planets, which is actually can be argued to be a kind of prediction that might hold true if we ever become a multiplanetary species. Maybe there will be planets that imperial powers try to monopolize, despite the fact that there's a nomadic people there, for resources. And the last example I want to bring up, like at least a last genre that I really like to read, is political fiction. Political fiction being the idea that like you explore power dynamics, forms of political philosophy as they're carried out, and people who pursue, there's like the psychology of people who pursue power. And the reason why I like to read this stuff is because I actually struggle to understand the points of view of those in power quite routinely. At least there's a particular group of people that I don't understand well. For example, if there's, say, someone who's in power for a very long time, let's say they're in power for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and there's many people who have said they have ruined their country or they're not a great leader, and my point of view, I would imagine that I would step down. I would leave because it's not popularly supported. However, there are people who don't do that, and sometimes I struggle to understand that. In the same way that some people also struggle to understand that there are human beings that just don't have a conscience, or at least don't have a strong conscience, I would also struggle to understand people who get into power and don't do what is best for a country or best for a group of people. So what I would like to do is read books like A Song of Ice and Fire, or otherwise popularly known as Game of Thrones. That book is really good at exploring the political psychology and also the power dynamics involved with, say, family nobles or political institutions or those who want to gain a lot of power. He does a really good job of exploring the psychology of that, and as a result, you can better texturize the reasoning you have about these kind of things, right? It helps you understand. It's like fuel for your car. If the new model you get from nonfiction, maybe you read some political philosophy nonfiction, which I have done, then you don't really get a lot of fuel or a lot of examples to inform that political philosophy. In fact, all of the political philosophy textbooks I have tend to go over schools of thought. They'll cover like Plato, Socrates, Democritus. They'll go over the different worldviews, but they don't really give you case examples of how those worldviews interact with someone's psychology, which is what political fiction can be really good for. So to sum up then, I would say fiction is great to read, not too much of it, because I also find that I don't struggle enough when I'm reading fiction. It is very easy to read. The books read very quickly, and you don't get new worldviews, which I think a part of reading is to gain new worldviews, not just new ways of using an already existing worldview. And so, although you can get fuel for your fire from reading fiction, which is why I read it, you also should read nonfiction. It shouldn't just be one or the other. And I think it was a bit of a detriment to me that I only read nonfiction for 3 or 4 years. There are also benefits, like for example, I was able to learn more disciplines as a result of only focusing on nonfiction. But especially because I want to write more as I get older and not just learn, I think I need to really switch to fiction to better explore some of the models that I'm learning inside nonfiction. So that's my take on this nonfiction thing. I think my view has changed before. Like I said, I used to believe that nonfiction and fiction was about characterizing truths about the world, but as I think about it more, because fiction can characterize a truth about the world, it's not just like this imagination versus reality. Fiction can characterize truths about the world, but in general, fiction doesn't explain new worldviews or new models inside the book. Like for example, you probably never find a fiction book, or at least very seldom will you find a fiction book that will teach you how to read a financial statement, or teach you how to read cash flow, balance sheets, so on and so forth. You probably won't find a fiction book that teaches you about personality theories. You probably won't find a fiction book that teaches you biochemistry of genes. You won't find this stuff, okay? But you will find fiction books that explore some of the consequences of learning about these ideas, right? There are tons of books that explore eugenics ideas, or the idea that there are ideal genes. There are tons of science fiction books that do that. So my view has changed, and my new view is fiction is fuel, and the nonfiction is the fire itself. With that being said, bye-bye.